One of the principal themes cinema articulates about the urban experience is how alienating it can be to live in a city. As an aspect of modernization, urban space was meant to be ordered, bounded, and rational, desiring to eliminate, quote, all traces of the ambivalence that characterized earlier modes of life. Paradoxically, however, this order gave form to a new, distinctly urban figure of ambivalence, the stranger. Rather than eliminating ambivalence, modernity displaced it. Its densely formulated environments fragmented the community of pre-modern society and began to impart a sense of anonymity in its inhabitants. John Dugan's Mouth to Mouth focuses on 4 homeless teenagers who are physically occupying the streets of Melbourne, but are living socially and psychologically outside of it. The film begins in a female detention center, which serves as the modernist embodiment of a desire towards categorizing socially deviant individuals, or bad girls, as one of the female characters playfully refers to herself, and segregating them from functional society. After being attacked by some of the other inmates, the film's 2 female protagonists, Carrie and Jeannie, resolve to escape the facility and make their way to the city. They are excited by the prospect, yelling and laughing as they bolt off into the night. The film then cuts to the girls in a car with several young men, making their way through the shades of night and artificial color that form Melbourne's central business district. The visual contrast between light and darkness reflects the simultaneous freedom and danger that attracted these girls to the metropolis in the first place. They perceive the city as a space where they can't be told what to do or who to be, a space free from the scrutiny of parents or teachers or detention officers. However, it is also a place free from the safety and communal comfort these agents provided. Almost immediately, that danger materializes as the group of young men target Carrie and Jeannie for a sexual encounter, with the girls only barely managing to deflect their advances. Mouth to Mouth depicts urban sexuality as a more carnal instinct, divorced from the traditional communal bonding of marriage or family. The anonymity of the city serves to alienate the young men from social expectations or responsibility, and the sensory pleasures provided by the city, especially visual stimulation, motivates the pursuit of sexual encounters without emotional investment. The predatory depiction of the urban male in Mouth to Mouth also suggests the transgressive presence of women within urban spaces, the notion that the female form invites or provokes masculine desire or lust, a desire that is disturbingly expressed through force and aggression. As unhappy as Carrie and Jeannie were in the juvenile facility, it at least offered them some semblance of safety, whereas central Melbourne is shown to be uncaring and often openly hostile, as evidenced by the scene in which Carrie is almost raped by one of the men in the back room of a pub. Masculinity is the established order here, because it presumes the vulnerable female is the interloper within this space, rather than the predatory male. While working at a fast food restaurant, the girls do eventually encounter some more pleasant gentlemen suitors, in the form of Serge and Tim, who have moved to Melbourne from the country. While these boys are certainly friendlier and more courteous, they still identify themselves by traditional gender roles. During a double date, they continually insist on paying for the girls' drinks, against the girls' wishes, perhaps in petition of a sexual encounter. Again, we are reminded of the slightly predatory nature of urban courtship, this time reduced to the harsh laws of economics within the sleazy milieu of another pub. Much of the film is spent with the girls and their new boyfriends searching for a place to sleep in the city. Aesthetically, the urban sprawl seems quite empty. At night, it is almost completely black, save for a few streetlights and the occasional passing car. In contrast to the hustle and bustle of other cinematic cities, Melbourne is depicted as eerily still, and much of the imagery is unaccompanied by music. While the threat of violence occasionally ruptures this veneer, Dugan's mise-en-scène overwhelmingly captures a feeling of loneliness rather than carnage. The film adds to this perception by depicting a disconnection between younger and older characters. For example, when the group stay at a friend's house, an older female occupant turns up the volume of her record player in order to drown out the voices of the young. They are treated disdainfully by adults, including shop clerks, police, and prospective employers, and basically have to support each other. At one point, an elderly homeless man attempts to befriend Carrie, but is promptly beaten by the aggressive young males who were presented as a sexual threat to the girls at the beginning of the film. Thus, the film implies that this generational disconnection is perpetrated by city dwellers of all ages. Dugan employs lighting to symbolize the isolation of his characters from the rest of society. In an effort to keep safe from the natural elements and hidden from any authority figures, the gang hole up in an abandoned inner-city factory. The interior of their dwelling is dark, dirty, and crumbling, bathing its occupants in a gloomy shadow, while the drawn curtains are often glowing with natural light. One morning, Carrie notices a group of protesters marching past her window. It is the most vibrant shot of the film thus far, combining the bright colors of their clothing, protest signs, and the sunlit grass with their momentum and laughter. It is an image of community, but it is viewed from the grim seclusion of the factory floor, with its faded wooden window panes mimicking prison bars against Carrie's wrists. The object of the protest, a criticism of the city's poor public transport system, reinforces the sense of fragmentation associated with urban living. But the way the image is framed suggests that Carrie has been alienated from social discourse altogether. The window represents a longing for her to be among other people, to be a normal teenager, to have a voice within this society, to aspire for something beyond her day-to-day survival. The following scene captures the reality of this survival, with Carrie and Jeannie being forced to steal food from a grocery. The incident recalls an earlier moment in the film in which the girls stole dresses from a fashion store. However, that crime was done for amusement and performed with giddy laughter, while this is an act of desperation, stemming from the basic human need to eat. They are visibly more anxious as the stakes are higher, and their living situation is obviously declining. The girls are detected by a security guard and chased out into Melbourne's bustling streets. They use the crowd to their advantage, disappearing into its anonymous embrace and concealing themselves from their pursuers' searching gaze. At one point he looks directly at them, but fails to register them as his target. This scene exemplifies the fragmentation of the individuality, wherein the two girls are liberated from social identity and responsibility by the crowd's immersive, sprawling intangibility. The security guard is estranged from the objects of his actions, physically close to those he seeks, but socially distanced. Moreover, Carrie and Jeannie have given themselves over to that estrangement, and are fully aware of how unnoticed and insignificant they are. They have essentially been reduced to vermin, being shooed away whenever they crawl out of their dark cave for a morsel of food. However, this anonymity does provide the young protagonist with the opportunity and freedom to transgress some of Melbourne's social boundaries, circumventing the city's rigid ordering of class. In one scene, they manage to sneak past the reception desk of a luxury hotel, and after some crafty manipulating of a room service menu card, manage to procure a gourmet feast, which they enjoy by the hotel's vacant rooftop swimming pool. The wide expanse of glowing light provided by the cityscape echoes the hope of freedom felt in the early stages of their life together, while the rippling water suggests the possibility of rebirth, namely for the city dwellers to shift from one identity to another. Where one day they might find themselves starving and homeless, the next they are on top of the world, surrounded by food, laughter, and luxury. The characters are actively resisting the city's attempts to categorize and contain them within fixed social roles. It is a moment of hope in the film's otherwise bleak third act. Unfortunately, the reprieve is temporary, and they remain separated from the city as a socio-economic entity. The reality of their poverty soon reasserts itself, revealing that the freedom to construct one's identity is illusory. Driven to desperate measures to survive, the women resort to the only option left open to them by a city stratified by class: prostitution. While Jeannie and her boyfriend Serge are resistant to the idea of sex work, Carrie gradually, quote, loses all moorings to the ordinary world of safety and positive connection, and is shown taking her leave from a string of male clients, end quote, in the very same hotel room which served as such a triumphant location for the group scenes prior. Dugan's choice not to show the sex acts implies that they are encounters Carrie would sooner forget or keep concealed from her friends, and that while she might believe the money provided by prostitution empowers her, quote, the tawdriness of the mise-en-scène contributes to a sense of spiraling vulnerability and loss of control, end quote. Mouth to Mouth concludes with the teenagers' dwelling being raided by police, Jeannie being arrested and returned to the detention center, and Serge and Tim being evicted by the city council, symbolically separating the characters from each other and the city. Carrie, however, was in another hotel room at the time, and thus returns to the factory to find it empty, a physical abandonment that reflects her own emotional detachment from the group and seemingly by the group. Several shots depict Carrie wandering alone in the darkened streets of Melbourne. Without her friends, she suddenly finds herself in a city full of strangers, with no one to turn to and no place to go. The vast maze of glowing lights and unknown faces, which once held such liberating potential, now represent Carrie's alienation. Her silhouette moves over a row of bright shop windows, mannequins staring back at her in a mockery of domestic bliss, suggesting the commodification of her own body. Once again, the windows present happiness and desire, while the streets themselves are saturated with grime and shadow. It is a reverse image of the earlier scene, where she watches the protest march from the factory window. In both scenes, Carrie is isolated and cast in shadow, except now she is on the outside, gazing into the city's warm but evidently artificial interior. The store window also reinforces the fact that the city is an economy rather than a community, which means those without money or purpose have no place within it. It is this contradiction between the promise of modern living and its dystopic reality that Dugan is struggling to reconcile. The camera closes in on Carrie's face as she halts and stares off into the distance. Her eyes tell a story of ruined dreams and lost family. As the audience, we have been privy to this story, but to the rest of the city, she is just another stranger, characterized only by her identity as a prostitute. She presses her cheek against the fabric of her coat, perhaps remembering the warm times once spent with Jeannie, Serge, and Tim. But then she blinks, and the memory is gone, as though it was only ever a dream, and she is alone again, just another stranger in an uncaring city. She turns and walks the other way, tracing her steps along the orderly row of parked cars, before vanishing into the crowd forever. Mouth to Mouth emphasizes the alienation of the city dweller from their environment, from each other, and from themselves. It characterizes the city of Melbourne as a place burdened by social dysfunction and fragmentation, along with the physical and emotional violence that loneliness produces. The sad irony is that Melbourne is home to over 4 million people, but director John Dugan proposes that its citizens are failing to acknowledge, empathize, or help one another. But given the city's continually reinforced function as an economy rather than a community, why should people care about those around them? The characters in Mouth to Mouth look at the faces passing